And for the most part, we did accept.
Good thing they put guns in our hands because the other people on the other side.
It's one of my younger brothers.
Oh, it is?
He's from he lives in Fond du Lac. He's been working with 12-step programs for 15 years.
Is he?
He's a yoga instructor. He just got certified to do yoga for people in 12-step.
Okay, let's get started. I was telling some of the people I had lunch with, my addiction is chocolate. But it's hard not to be addicted to that when you come from the land of Hershey. Yes. If you ever get to Pennsylvania, Hershey, PA, you gotta go to Hershey Park. Picture it, an amusement park where the theme is chocolate. Disney may have a mouse. We've got chocolate.
I wonder if that's where Willy Wonka's from.
Could it's like Willy Wonka, yeah. It's called Hershey's Chocolate World, where you go and you see how they make the chocolate, and they have this whole room. It's like the land of chocolate. Everything's chocolate. Yeah, they pay for it though.
If they had chocolate fountains, I'd go.
Chocolate is health food. Just remember that.
Up in that wedding reception. I love just they run out of
Okay, so
issues much.
in the first two talks, we talked about the pornography problem in America, what's going on out there. We talked about the addictiveness, what leads a person into addiction. We talked about a lot of the deep wounds that get them there. We talked about how this affects marriage, wives, and so forth. So this afternoon, we're going to talk more about practical application, what we can do about it. So this first talk is going to be about the road to recovery. What does that look like? So now, when it comes to figuring out whether a person is addicted, this is something that is really done by a mental health professional who's trained in sexual addiction. So you don't have to worry about doing that yourselves. But I want to give you sort of a glimpse into what that is. So the first thing we need to do is determine whether or not we're dealing with a pornography problem or a pornography addiction. Just like a person can have a drinking problem and not be an alcoholic, a person can have a porn problem and not be a porn addict. So what does a porn problem look like? Well, here's a person, they're viewing pornography at least once a month, not every day, or they're not binging really. It's usually the same pornography. It's not getting worse, not getting more deviant. It's not premeditated. They're not thinking about it. They may stumble upon it. Maybe there's a pop-up or an ad or something like that online. There's little or no craving for pornography. There's no marked increase of porn use. It's not like they're spending more and more time viewing pornography. All right? So, but they still find themselves several times a month getting into it. That's a porn problem, and it does require immediate treatment because it could possibly turn into an addiction. With a pornography addiction, okay, they're viewing pornography frequently or they're binging on it. Right? They're using porn to ease or avoid some type of emotional pain. Right? They may be aware of it, they may not be aware of it. There's a tolerance that develops. Little isn't enough, they need more of it and a more stronger form of it. There's a dependence that develops, there's a craving for it, and there's often withdrawal symptoms. And even if there isn't withdrawal symptoms, a person can still be dependent on it. Think of the man, he goes online, he views pornography, he masturbates, he feels terrible afterwards, and he says, I will never do this again. And what happens? The next day he's back at it again. All right? That shows the dependence. All those chemical levels in his brain, they're starting to drop, and dopamine says, oh, we need to get this back up, you need to go back to porn. That's what's happening. He may be tempted to act out the scenes he views in porn. This may mean going to a strip club or a porn shop and so forth. And he may be willing to take serious risks to view pornography, such as viewing it at work. These are signs of addiction. Okay. Now, there's a couple of good self-tests for pornography addiction. The first one is the Internet sex screening test. I have here Integrity Restored. We don't have that up yet, but if you go to peterkloponis.com, you will find it there. There are some round postcards on your table. On the back has the website. All right. The other one is from Dr. Kevin Skinner. It's his self-test for internet pornography, and that's at growthclimate.com. Right. I'll update these slides before I send them to Sakura, then she can get them to you. So what does recovery look like? All right. Well, this is the recovery program that I developed. It's called the Integrity Starts Here Recovery Program. And I developed this about 6 years ago because men were coming to me and they were looking for a Catholic recovery program. And I looked all over and couldn't find it. There really just wasn't anything out there. So after a lot of prayer and discernment, I realized, okay, maybe God is calling me to create a Catholic recovery program. Now, rather than reinvent the wheel, what I did was I looked at several really good, successful recovery programs, and I asked the basic question, what works? Let's keep what works, let's keep what's been clinically and empirically proven to work, and get rid of the rest. And I boiled it down to 7 points. These are 7 things that are needed for healthy recovery. And you work, these are not 7 steps, they're 7 points, and I call them that because they're all of equal importance and you work on them all at the same time. But you're going to find out that it's not rocket science. So let me go over them. Again, I apologize if you can't see them up here because it's too dark, but the first one at the top, this is called self-knowledge and commitment. Self-knowledge means you admit you have the problem. There's no denial. And you take full responsibility for the addiction, for the consequences of the addiction, and for your recovery. And you're committed to doing whatever it takes to recover. So if recovery means you have to move a mountain, well, by golly, you better be ready to move a mountain. That's what it's about. Now, self-knowledge also means knowing what your weaknesses are. So we identify your triggers. What are the things that trigger a person into viewing pornography? We identify any common rituals that lead them into it. We identify their danger zones. A danger zone is a specific time, place, or situation where they're more likely to fall. For some men, it could be late at night. It could be after a hard day at work. It could be after an argument with their spouse. I work with a lot of men who are in sales at business trips. Are danger zones because they end up alone in a hotel room. Once we have all this information, triggers, rituals, danger zones, then we can develop strategies to avoid acting out. I call them battle plans. I have battle plan worksheets. For every situation where they may fall, they've got a battle plan. I'm a firm believer in having tangible things to look at, to pull out, to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. So that's the first one, self-knowledge and commitment. The second one is called purifying your life. We get rid of all pornography. We get rid of all access to it. We make sure it doesn't come back. And because our technology is the #1 source of pornography, we make sure all of your technology is monitored. Here's where filtering and accountability software is important. On your tables there are flyers there for a service called Covenant Eyes. This is one of the best services out there. And what you do, you subscribe to it and you download it onto every single device you have that has access to the internet. And they offer 2 different services. The first one they offer is a filtering service, where they work to filter out as much inappropriate material as possible. All right? Which is good for little kids. It's not too good for teens or adults because they can kind of find ways around that. The second one thing they offer is an accountability service. Now with an accountability service, it doesn't block out anything, but it monitors it all, okay? So I set it up, I subscribe to it, I have it downloaded on all my devices, and let's say I have Don here is my, or John is my accountability partner. All right, I give them his email address. And once a week he gets an email report. And if I've gone to any questionable websites, he's going to know what website, what day, what time, and for how long. All right, and that's what's really helpful. All right, so if I know Big Brother's watching, I'm going to be careful with my use of technology. So you put that on your computer, your laptop, your tablet, your e-reader, your Nook, your Kindle, your cell phone, your iPod, your iPad, all of that. That's what's needed. Now, purifying your life could be other things. If your drive to work takes you past a porn shop, well, you find a new route to work. If you have friends that like to look at porn or go to strip clubs, well, you got to get some new friends. I mean, this is where that commitment comes in. All right. If you, get that Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, you may have to cancel your subscription. Right. All of this. Purify everything. Right. And make sure it doesn't come back. The third one is support and accountability. You cannot do it alone. There are no lone rangers in recovery. There are a lot of online programs out there that say, if you do our online program, you'll be cured. Healing comes in community. And you have to surround yourself with other people who understand the struggle, who are going to be there to support you and keep you accountable. And here's where the 12-step groups come in. And there are a lot of different ones out there, and they're all excellent. How many of you know who Bill Wilson was? Right, who's Bill Wilson? Co-founder of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. He had a great quote, I love it. He says, I figured out that the best way for one drunk to stay sober is to help another drunk stay sober. And that's why they call it a fellowship. It's a fellowship. You're working together. They're helping you, you're helping them, you're working as a team. And this is what it's like. And I have to tell you, so, you know, I don't tell everybody, if you ever want to experience true 100% unconditional love and acceptance, go to a support group meeting. There you can share your deepest, darkest secret. Nobody's going to shame you. They're going to accept you. They're going to love you. And they're going to be there for your healing. Right? That's the big thing. And this is needed. And I always tell them that the hardest thing you'll ever do in recovery is go to your first support group meeting. That's going to be the hardest. But it's going to be the best. Why is it hard? Well, there's 3 different fears that they have. Number 1, you know, will it get out? Will it be made known in public that I struggle with this disease, this addiction? And the answer is no. Okay? When you talk about confidentiality, it's like the sealed confession. Nobody talks. Right? In fact, a lot of places don't even advertise where the meetings are, when and where they're held. It's very private. Number 2, they're worried about what kind of people am I going to meet there? Am I going to meet a bunch of sick perverts? No. You're going to meet good people like yourself, because I got to tell you, the sick perverts, they're not going to these meetings. They're out there doing their thing sexually. It's good people. Good people who want to get well. We always say in recovery, it's not about a bad person getting good. It's about a sick person getting better. That's what it's about. You find good people. Number 3, they worry about, what if I meet somebody I know? Right? And my feeling is, if that happens, congratulations, you now have an accountability partner. You have someone you can work with. Yeah, it's awkward. That lasts about 5 minutes. And then you're like, okay, we all know what we're here for. Let's help each other. And that's where I only ever had one situation where that happened. A man who's in his 60s went to a support group meeting. Who did he meet there? His son. Well, talk about awkward. Yeah, but hey, it was good. Speaking of another awkward moment, I'm working with a 15-year-old boy right now. And I have a policy that I will offer a free phone consultation to anybody that's struggling. If you're struggling, call me up, I'll give you a free phone consultation. So the boy calls me up on his own, and he says, you know, I need some help. And I say, okay. And we talk about it. I said, well, do your parents know about this? And he says, no. And I said, well, you really need to talk to your parents about it, so they can get you the help. And he said, well, I don't know if I can do that. And all of a sudden, I hear this other deeper voice on the line that says, don't worry, son, we'll get you the help you need. I thought, what? Well, just as he was on the phone, his father picked up another phone to make a phone call and heard the whole conversation. But it was great because he said, hey, I understand. And was able to get his son the help he needed. I mean, God intervenes these ways. This is great. Okay. But getting back to the support group, this is what it is, you know. And when we talk about those 5 core beliefs, a big part of the healing process is healing those deep wounds and changing those core beliefs. Right? And what keeps a person trapped in those core beliefs is often shame. It's in that support group meeting that people can let go of their shame. Because you go to this place where people love you and accept you, and you finally realize, yes, I am lovable. And if people really knew me, they could love me and accept me more, and I can count on others to meet my needs. This is where those core beliefs begin to be changed. So this is so very important, is to have that support group. And there are many different ones out there, and we'll talk about which ones are out there too. Okay? But I want to say the importance of support and accountability. Point number 4 is counseling. Getting to the root cause of it. Because pornography is really, it's the symptom. The question is, what is driving it? And this is where counseling comes in. Identifying what those deep wounds are and working on the healing of them. That is important. Because if you don't get to the root cause of it and you don't resolve that, any sobriety you have is really just going to be white knuckling it. And you're going to end up falling again. That's what happens there. So it's getting in there, working. What are those deep wounds? What are those traumas? What are we working with? And of course, for a lot of couples, it also means working with a wife who's also struggling with her trauma, the betrayal trauma, working with a couple to heal their marriage. Right? That's been wounded, bringing healing and restoration into that. Counseling is very important. Right? Point number 5 is a spiritual plan. You need God. You need God. Now, it's not like we're simply going to pray this away, because we know that doesn't work. But you need to understand God's love. So many people I work with have no idea how much God loves them, how God delights in them, that they are fearfully and wonderfully made. They need to understand God's love. A friend of mine, he's a priest, he often talks about a lot of people live their lives following the gospel of the suck. What does that mean? There's this belief that life sucks, and if you're really good, at the end you'll get a big party in heaven. It's like, no, that's not what life is about. Heaven begins here on earth. It's, God wants just to be joyful. Doesn't mean we're not going to suffer. God doesn't promise happiness here, but he does promise joy. But we have to understand God's love for us. And this is so important. And here's where you come in. Spiritual direction is so important. For most of the clients I work with, I encourage them to get a spiritual director. And then I will get permission to talk to the spiritual director to help them in their healing process. For example, if a man has a very deep father wound, which most of them do, I'll work with the spiritual director, and the spiritual director will work with the client on helping them to develop a devotion to St. Joseph as a father, spiritual father. Now, ultimately, God is our Heavenly Father. We need to turn to Him, but who can wrap their mind around God? But St. Joseph was a man we can understand him and relate to him. That's one way. If there's a deep mother, when we develop a devotion to the Blessed Mother, all right? In helping them to really understand God's deep love for them, it helps them to be able to forgive themselves and understand how much they are lovable. So this is what we have to do. And it's also about understanding, how God's working in this process. Okay? And oftentimes it's knowing the difference between a healing and a cure. Right? Who here can tell me what the difference is between a healing and a cure? Yes?
Healing is my spiritual awakening in relationship and confidence that all is well with my God. Cure is getting rid of the physical symptomology of the disease.
Right, you're on track here. I tell people the difference is time. A cure is immediate. And God can do that. God can snap his fingers and cure you immediately and you'll be done. But what would that do to your relationship with God? Probably not much. You'd say, thanks God, I appreciate it. I'll come back when I need you. Right? But with the healing, God's saying, let's walk for a while. Let's talk for a while. Let's get to know one another. Let's develop that relationship. Okay? The end result of a healing and the cure is the same. It's restoration. But with the healing, when you get to the end of it, you're not going to want to say, okay, Lord, I'll see you later. You're going to say, let's keep walking together. Let's keep talking together. Because what's God's greatest desire with us? Relationship. A deep, intimate relationship. Because at the end of the day, that's all we've got. It's just us and God. That's it. Everything else is passing away. Right? But it's us and God. That's what God's looking for. And here's how God is using. I hear so many people, when they've been through recovery, they talk about themselves as, being grateful addicts. Because they find that from this healing and recovery process, they develop such a deep, intimate relationship with God that they could have never had before. Right? And this is it. So many times people come to me in recovery and they say, I just want to go back to the way things were. I said, no, you don't. No, you don't. Believe me, you don't. God wants to create something new, and it begins with that relationship. And this is what they start to see. And it's about realizing, okay, how's God working in this recovery? And a lot of people say, where is God in all this? I say it's very simple. I go back to the joke. How many of you heard the joke about the man with the flood coming? You heard that one? Finally gets to heaven and says, God, I thought you'd take care of me. God said, well, I sent you a car, a boat, and a helicopter. What else do you want? Right? It's through the people in our lives, the people that he brings into our lives. I tell my clients, the fact that we're talking together today is no coincidence. I believe God brought us together. He wanted us to talk. Not that I'm any great savior. I'm not. But God wanted us here. This is God working. The people in your support group, the literature you're reading, the spiritual director you're seeing, your confessor, all of that. This is God working. Okay? This is God working. Even for wives who are dealing with that trauma, as terrible as it is, that could open the door for them healing other wounds in their lives. Aside from what's happening with the pornography, they could have other wounds that they've never addressed. Now this is an opportunity to address them. So here's how God's working. Sometimes God has to allow things to kind of blow up in our lives to get our attention and to really work on it. So here's where this is important, that spiritual plan. And bringing our Catholic faith into it is so important. You know, first of all, the sacraments. The sacrament of reconciliation is so important in understanding, you know, why does God forgive us? Because he loves us. Why does he love us? Because we're lovable. That's it. You know, the sacrament of Eucharist, the healing and grace and strength that comes from that. Occasionally, I will have men whose addictions are so severe they need residential treatment. They need to go away for 30 days. For them, what do I recommend? The anointing of the sick. Right? Because this is a disease. They need that. They need to have these tangible ways of seeing God working in their lives. Daily prayer, Lectio Divina. These are so important. They're ways of bringing it in. So our Catholic faith is so crucial in with this. You know, developing devotions with to the Holy Family for healing family of origin wounds. I was working with a Jewish man once, had a deep father, and I thought, what am I going to do? Well, he developed a devotion to Abraham as a spiritual father who worked wonders. Right? God can use anything. So that spiritual plan is very important in the healing process. Right? The next one is education. Right? It's very simple. You have to educate yourself in this stuff. What are we dealing with? The addiction, the root causes, the consequences, the recovery. What's that all about? For a lot of the people I work with, they have no idea what healthy relationships are all about. Healthy intimacy, healthy sexuality. And here's where theology of the body is important. And they need to learn about this. So there's a lot of things I have them reading and working on, and videos and DVDs and conferences, all of that. Education is a big component. The final point, number 7, that's needed is virtue. If you're going to fight a vice, you have to do it with virtue. And this is it. And this is about transformation, becoming the person God created you to be. That's what it is. And it comes to understanding, you know, what is our goal, what is our mission? Now here's a question for the men out there. Not for the women, just for men. Okay? Why did God put men on this planet? What is our job? What are we here for?
Lead our families to heaven.
Okay, lead. Anything else?
Protection.
Protect. Anything else?
Get to heaven ourselves.
To seek and serve God.
Well, women do that too. Provide, yeah. God calls us men to be leaders, providers, and protectors. That's our job. We cannot do that if we're enslaved to anything. God calls women to be helpers, nurturers, and comforters. They cannot do that if they're enslaved to anything. Okay? And it's not to say one is better than the other. Right? They're both equal but different. But this is it. So, how do we become that great leader, provider, and protector? How do we become that nurturer, helper, and comforter? We focus on striving to live a virtuous life. And I actually have virtue exercises they work on. Now we have theological virtues, cardinal virtues, moral virtues, and things like that. I kind of simplify it. I go back to the Boy Scouts. How many of you remember Boy Scouts? Okay, here's your test for today. Recite for me the Scout Law. That is your pin drop? No, that's the oath. A Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. That's it. And I want you all to hand in your merit badges. Those are virtues. Okay. And what I find is that when men understand this, when they realize, okay, this is my mission in life, is to become the best leader, provider, and protector of being. When they really, you know, adopt that and they embrace it and they make that their goal, and to do that, they're living these virtues. All right? This is where recovery becomes easier. They get excited about life because they're, yeah, like finally, I know what I'm here for. I know what I'm supposed to do. It's very easy, you know. Guys often come to me and say, Dr. Kofonos, I just don't understand it. What do women want? I say it's very simple. A woman wants a man who's going to be a good leader, provider, and protector. Can I get an amen?
Amen.
Amen. Okay. You know, and what woman wouldn't love to be married to a man who is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent? All right? Guys come, they say, you know, they're struggling at work. This, I don't understand. I say, if you want to succeed in work, when you go to your office, you strive to be the best leader, provider, and protector you can be. and you strive in your job to be trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, reverent. I actually have a list of over 30 virtues and character strengths that we work on. Right? This is the goal. Right? When I look at the recovery process, I see it as a 3-tiered process. The first tier is sobriety. All right? You stop using the drug, and that's great. The second tier is inner healing. We get to the root cause and we heal those deep wounds. And the third tier is transformation. Becoming that new creation in Christ, that new person God created you to be. Whether you're a man or a woman, this is what God has in store. So many people come to me, they say they're looking for sobriety. I say, that's great, and we're going to do that, but God has bigger plans. Much bigger plans. Transformation. And where do we see that? Well, it's embedded in this. So the first tier, which is sobriety. Okay, that's the first 3 points. Self-knowledge and commitment, purifying your life, and support and accountability. That's what gets you to sobriety. The second tier is inner healing. What is that? Support and accountability, counseling, and a spiritual plan. There's overlap there. That's inner healing. The third tier, transformation, spiritual plan, education, and virtue. You can see the overlap. That's the process. It's not rocket science. Okay, and listen and I'll explain to you the entire recovery program. And it is going to be very unique and customized for each person. You know, the recovery program for a married man in his 40s with 3 kids is going to be different than the recovery program from a college kid in college. Right? The recovery program for a man is going to be different. It's going to be very different. Okay, and so what happens is when a person is in recovery, the first person you want to get them to really is a good counselor who understands this process, okay? Because the counselor's job is not only to help them work through those deep wounds, but also to help them to put together their own unique individual recovery program. Because a person comes to me for recovery, you know, depending on what there are, I might recommend different books for them to read, different literature. There are several different kinds of support groups out there, and I'll help them to figure out which is the best for them. So this is what we do. It has to be customized. There is no one-size-fits-all program. That's why I call this 7 points. Very basic framework. All right? So, but this is what a healthy recovery program looks like. Okay? And to this you can add all kinds of things. You know, you could add, you know, different exercises, different types of mindfulness, breathing, all kinds of things you can add to it. But this is the basics. So that's what it looks like. I've been using this for 5 years and it's been very successful. So what are the obstacles to recovery? The number one is shame. Like I said, shame focuses on the person. It says because of what you've done or because of what happened to you, you're this terrible, horrible person, it's all your fault and you should just go and crawl under a rock and die. And I've seen many people that are like that. It keeps them from reaching out and getting the help that they need. Right? They're ashamed because of their sexual behaviors. Many of them are ashamed because, you know, the reason they became addicted is because they themselves were abused, maybe sexually abused growing up, and they've always blamed themselves. They see themselves as damaged goods. And one man, he said, I feel like I just have this black mark on my soul that's never going to go away. And it was shame. And it was hard for him to realize and let go of it and realize that, you know, as a child, he wasn't responsible for that. And to let go of that shame. But that's the number one thing. Next we have denial. There's a lot of people out there that don't believe they have a problem. And what's the big deal? All men look at this stuff. So I like to look at it every day. Big deal. There's denial. Selfishness is a huge problem. You know, at that point, even if they know that it's wrong, they say, I want to do it, I'm going to do it, and that's it. Fear. Right? Fear of what recovery is going to cost them. How much work it's going to take. The time and the effort, can they really do it? Fear that if I'm in recovery, does that, you know, if that means my wife finds out about this, is she going to leave me? Would I lose my job? Will my kids disown me? There's a lot of fear wrapped up in that. And pride. I mean, I work with people. These are people usually in high positions, either in business or politics, even in the church, and you know, they think, well, I'm going to, you know, I can do it on my own. I can pull myself up by my own bootstraps. Well, usually that ends up failing. But these are some of the obstacles that we find to recovery. But the number one is shame. So let's talk about the church and pornography. Oh, I already talked about these ones here. Right. So, what can you do to help those people who may be struggling with addiction? Here's where we really get into practical application. First of all, be committed to the church's teaching on human sexuality. Don't be afraid to teach and preach about it. All right? And don't be afraid to discuss the dangers of pornography with teens and youth ministry. First of all, you have to be committed to the church's teachings on human sexuality, and unfortunately, a lot of clergy are not. And then don't be afraid to teach or preach about it. And there are ways you can do it. You're up there preaching on Sunday, you don't have to talk about pornography, but you can say, hey, there's a lot of bad stuff on the internet. And the parents will know what you're talking about. Right? And even with teens, you can say, there's a lot of bad stuff out there. They know what you're talking about. We have to discuss it. We can't be afraid to address this anymore. Host training conferences for parents. This is needed, and I actually have something for you here. It's called the Unfiltered Parent Workshop DVD. And this is what I did about 2 years ago. I teamed up with Covenant Eyes, and we created this DVD. It's a 45-minute DVD. With Covenant Eyes, I'm in it. I don't get any royalties on it. Should have read the damn contract better. But anyway, it's called Unfiltered. Equipping Parents for an Ongoing Conversation About Internet Pornography, a Parent Workshop DVD. And you can contact CovenantEyes.com and get a copy of this. Not only do they have the DVD, they have a workshop guidebook that you can use with questions on there. And there's a parent's guide you can get. All right? You can do this in your parishes. So many people say, yeah, I want to train the parents, but I don't know what to do. We got it all packaged up right here for you. Okay? You can also get my book and pass it out to everybody. I make $1 per book, so my goal is to sell 1 million books.
You can build a contract better on that one.
Well, hey, you know, as I say, in my line of work, I'm never going to become a millionaire, but I'll never be out of a job. Okay. So we need to teach teenagers that true masculinity and femininity is measured by one's character, virtue. Not by how sexy they are or how they can perform in bed or anything like that. That's what we have to teach them. We have to teach teenagers what it means to be a true lady and a true gentleman. Okay? You know, we have to teach them that. How do you treat a lady? How do you treat a gentleman? How do you act like a gentleman? How do you act like a lady? You know? Remember the old charm school people used to talk about, finishing school? This is what we have to get back to. Be ready to refer people to the proper help. Identify the resources needed for recovery. Train therapists, support groups, men's groups, books, websites, DVDs, all that. In your packet of handouts, I have a whole list of resources for people. Now, there was some questions yesterday about referring people to support groups because there's, you know, a lot of parishioners out there that are in parishes, they're in rural areas, there's just nothing out there. That's okay. There are a lot of groups today that meet by phone and on the internet. There are online meetings. All right. So if you have a computer with a camera, you can get in there and you can be in this online support group meeting. So thanks to that. And even in counseling, I work with people all over the country and internationally. I do a lot of my counseling by Skype. I actually have a couple in Australia that have come to me for help. They get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and we have a Skype counseling session. Right. Let's use technology to our advantage. So it doesn't matter where you live, you can still get the counseling you need, you can get the support groups, you can get all that. Okay, so don't worry about that. But we have that there in there. All right. Men's groups. You know, we talked about things like the Kingsmen, and that's a big one out there. There's a lot of good ones, and we'll talk about that too. Books, websites, DVDs. There's the Integrity Restored website, and there's also my personal website, peterkloponis.com. We have a lot of resources there. Consider starting a men's ministry group that can address pornography. And this is important. Now, if you're going to do a men's ministry group, you're not going to call it the men's anti-porn group, because nobody will come. Believe me, it's been tried. This one's... Okay. But men's ministries are so important, and that's a place where we can address it. And there are different groups out there. There's the King's Men. How many are familiar with That Man Is You? So from Paradisus Day. It's really big down south. There's an organization called Paradisus Day. They have a men's ministry program called That Man Is You. And they're drawing in anywhere from 50 to 100 men in a parish early in the morning. And they have a 3-year cycle on learning about the faith and becoming better men, better husbands, better fathers. It's incredibly successful. And again, they provide you everything you need to set this up. And there's the National Fellowship of Catholic Men that can provide resources. Crossing the Goal groups. Are you familiar with the TV show on EWTN called Crossing the Goal? Yeah. Hosted by Danny Abramowitz, former football player and coach. Well, he has these small groups, he calls them huddles, so that you can set up in your parish. And it's in these small groups, these men's ministries, that you can really address the issue of pornography in a safe place. All right? So this is something you can do. Offer to host a 12-step group in your parish for those addicted to pornography. And there's a lot of them out there. There's going to be a couple here today that are going to talk about our group called the My House Initiative. And there are a lot of them out there. There's Sexaholics Anonymous. That's there. I really like that. There's Sex Addicts Anonymous. There's Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. There are 2 really good Protestant Christian ones I like. One is called Celebrate Recovery. An excellent one out there, and that's really not for any one specific addiction. You could be struggling with anything and go to those meetings. They're great. The other is called the Life Recovery Meetings, and Life, L-I-F-E, stands for Living in Freedom Every Day. This is specifically for sexual addiction. Their website is freedomeveryday.com. Celebrate Recovery is celebraterecovery.com. Sexaholics Anonymous is sa.org. Right? But I do have that in your packets there. Right? These are excellent 12-step groups. Offer to host one in your parish, and they'll give you all the information you need to host one. Okay? Again, educate parents and teens about healthy relationships and sexuality. Here's where theology of the body comes in. In fact, with this unfiltered DVD, there's 3 people in it. I'm in it. I'm the star, even though they gave me third billing. There's Matt Fred. He's a young guy. He's an apologist. He goes around speaking to teens all over the country. And then there's Damon Owens, who's the director of the Theology of the Body Institute. They have great resources for youth ministry, teaching them about healthy sexuality and healthy relationships. And we need to communicate the beauty and sacredness of sexuality in the sacrament of marriage and in marriage prep programs. We have to address this. Okay? We need to criticize permissive parenting and the contraceptive mentality. That's the idea that parents need to be their kids' best friends, when the kids are a burden. We need to strengthen Catholic fatherhood, and here's where men's ministry is also very important. Men need to know that they have a place in the parish, and we need to strengthen fathers. There's a lot of people out there with very deep father wounds. We need to strengthen this. And teach that true masculinity or femininity is measured by one's character. Right? Now I want to talk to you about a new organization. So it's called Integrity Restored. The website is integrityrestored.com. And of course that's the name of my book is Integrity Restored. And what I realized a couple years ago is this was too big for me to fight alone. So I teamed up with several other people, and we created an organization called Integrity Restored. It's an educational organization. We are supported by Stewardship Mission, which is another Catholic organization. It's run by this Catholic billionaire. And what it does is they basically bankroll other ministries. And they support Lighthouse Catholic Media, which does the kiosks in your parishes. They support Jason Everett, who talks about chastity, Marty Rotello, who's a Catholic singer. Well, they've invited us on board to help us, and so we're going to be coming out with a lot of materials. Right now we just have the website, which does have a lot of good videos and good articles on it, but we're going to be doing conferences, we're going to offer training programs. We're setting up a training program right now for Catholic therapists to treat sexual addiction. We hope to be rolling that out in September of 2016. And the nice thing about it is that it will be totally online. All online. We're also going to be creating sort of a watered down version of that for lay people. So instead of being a certified, therapist here, it's going to be called a sexual addiction resource coach. Right? So you're just kind of providing the resources and helping people get to where they need as far as help. We're going to be doing that. We're going to be creating an intensive workshop for priests, on this, particularly helping people in the confessional and spiritual direction and so forth. So we have a lot of plans coming for what we're going to be offering. But a lot of it's going to be based on a lot of education. Right? And that's what we really need to do in providing good resources. So I also have a workbook that I'm coming out with this. Unfortunately, I need your prayers on that because I kind of lost my publisher. Integrity Restored was published by Emmaus Road Publishing, which is out of Steubenville, Ohio. And they loved my book, and they said, yeah, we'll do a workbook, we'll do DVDs, we'll do all of that. Well, a couple of months ago, they were bought out by the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology, which is run by Dr. Scott Hahn, which is great. However, they focus on biblical theology. This really doesn't fit into that. So they're really not interested in doing my workbook. So I have a literary agent, and we're going to be approaching Ignatius Press, and so you can pray for me on that one. So I'm learning about the publishing business, and it's kind of, you know. So if you ever want to experience real rejection, try getting a book published. Okay. And then the letters are nasty. Unbelievable. You know, it's not like saying, well, thanks, but no thanks, but, you know, no thank you. Your writing really doesn't fit what we're needing, and it's, you know, very amateur, and it's like, give me a break. Anyway. So right now, like I said, there's my website, which is peterkloponis.com, which really focuses on the recovery program, which is called Integrity Starts Here. And then there's integrityrestored.com, which is more of an educational one on basically protecting families and so forth. And we're going to be doing more for that. Okay. So what are you people going to be? You're going to be the ones who really do a couple things. First of all, it's directing parishioners to the right resources. Okay. Therapists, support groups, literature, and so forth. You're just directing them to that. That's all. You're not the counselors. You're not doing that. Number two is where you can really work in the recovery programs, and this would be working with the addict and their therapist as a spiritual director in helping them to develop that deeper relationship with God, understanding God's love for them, understanding God's mercy, His compassion, His forgiveness, His healing, all of that. Right? And that's from a more spiritual level. You know, I can't do that. You know, as a therapist, I need to focus on the psychological, but the spiritual is such an important component. I need someone that can step in and help with that. And that's where you all come into this. So you can play a very critical role in that healing process. All right. Okay. Any questions about any of this? Yes?
In your talks, you've talked about dealing with men. Do you only deal with men? And are there counselors that deal with women?
I deal with women too. Okay, many of the issues are the same with women also. And I have to tell you, I'm glad you brought that up because I'm going to talk about that. For women, it's much more difficult because women struggle with far more shame than men do when they're struggling with a sexual addiction. They really do. You know, because the man, he gets addicted to pornography and sex. We say, okay, yeah, we understand men are pigs. It's what they do. If a woman admits she's addicted, oh my gosh, she's a slut. We automatically brand her. We call her these terrible names, terrible labels, and that should never happen. It is more difficult for a woman to seek help than it is for a man. And we need to create an environment where women feel safe enough to come and seek help. And here's where you wives can help out. You know, letting people know, letting women know if they're struggling, you know, come here, talk to me. We'll help you. We'll get you the resources. We'll get you the help you need. And there are groups for women out there. There are ministries. There's a couple of resources I want to refer you to. There's a woman, her name is Marnie Ferree, F-E-R-R-E-E. First name is Marnie Ferree. And she wrote a great book called No Stones. She herself is a recovering sex addict. And after going through recovery, she went back to school, became a counselor, and now she has a ministry to women. She's down in Tennessee. And she has a wonderful book, a wonderful story. She has a workbook. You know, and it's something that I really, you know, guide women through who are dealing with this because they are dealing with sexual addiction. There's a young woman, her name is Crystal Renaud, R-E-N-A-U-D. And she has a book in a ministry. I don't like the name of it, but the name of her book is Dirty Girls Come Clean, and her ministry is called Dirty Girls Ministries. Now, I don't like the name of it, but it's a phenomenal ministry that she's reaching out to young women, all right, with help and support. They have a whole online community. There's, you know, and I will tell you, it's very difficult for women because there are far more resources out there for men than there are for women. You know, it's like 80 years ago with alcoholism. They thought it was just a men's issue. They didn't think that women became alcoholics. Well, yeah, we know they do. So we do need to have more resources out there for women. But here are two really great resources. If you go online to YouTube, type in Marnie. Her first name is Marnie, M-A-R-N-E-E, Ferree, F-E-R-R-E-E. She has videos on YouTube that you can watch, and she's really wonderful. Really, really wonderful for that, for the women. For wives who are struggling, there are resources for them. There are support groups for them that they can go to. With the Life Recovery groups, they have groups for men and they have groups for spouses that they can go to, and that's also very important. So, how many of you are familiar with Al-Anon? Anybody? Well, you know AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. Al-Anon is the group for the family members of alcoholics where they can find support and healing. Well, just as there's Sexaholics Anonymous now, there's now S-Anon, which is for family members of sex addicts where they can get help, okay? I do not recommend S-Anon, okay? And why? This is going to sound terribly sexist of me, but when you get a group of women together in a room who are deeply wounded, deeply betrayed, deeply traumatized, you think they're going to find healing? No. They'll commiserate. And it's very difficult to find that kind of healing. So for women doing this, I recommend them going to Al-Anon, because there is going to be, you know, there's men and women in there, and I'll tell you, you know, you go to any of these meetings, I guarantee you're going to find someone who's also dealt with pornography addiction. You know, it's just like for people struggling with pornography addiction, if they can't find any support groups in their community, I tell them, go to an AA meeting, because I guarantee you're going to find several people there who are also struggling with pornography. Okay? So that's something that they can do. There's an excellent book for wives who have been really hurt by this. The title of the book is Shattered Vows, and the author, her name is Deborah Lazer, L-A-A-S-E-R, or no, L-A-A-Z-E-R, Lazer, there's two A's. And her husband, Mark Lazer, Mark and Debbie Lazer, they're two of my gurus, right? I was actually trained by Mark Lazer. Mark Lazer, we're going back 30 years ago, he was a Protestant pastor and counselor, but he also became a sex addict. And he ended up having sex with people in his church, and it finally came out and blew up, and it was a terrible scandal. They lost everything, you know. And they had only been married a few years, they had a few small children. I mean, it was devastating, right? And in her book, Shattered Vows, she talks about her journey through this healing process. And what's interesting is she says, you know, when this all happened, she realized that she had three choices. She could leave her husband, she could divorce him. Right? She could stay married, but really sort of in name only, just for the kids' sake. Or she could trust that God had a plan for her marriage, for healing and restoration. Right? She trusted God. It was hard, it took every fiber of her being. There were days when she wanted to just give up, but she stuck with it, and they made it through. Okay? And now they minister to people in their churches on this. And now I say all my training is from Protestant programs. When it comes to dealing with pornography or sexual addiction, I have to say the Protestants are light years ahead of us Catholics. They have so much good materials, programs, all of that. We're just starting out here. So, but I figure, you know, let's use their materials. So there are good resources out there for men struggling with addiction, women struggling for addiction, and for spouses. There are a lot of good things out there that we can look at. Okay, and that's a long, drawn out answer, but anyway. What other questions might you have? Yes?
You just briefly touched on the priests and their addictions. Is there some place where we could learn about the priest's point of view of those addictions so we could understand what happened and where they are, where they came from?
For priests who are struggling with the addiction,
Yeah, for the whole scandal that occurred, 10 years ago, and some place where we could begin to understand why that occurred.
I really don't know. If you're talking about the pre-sexual abuse scandal,
Yes.
I'll tell you what the problem was homosexuality. It wasn't pedophilia, right? Because the majority of the victims were adolescent boys. They weren't, pedophilia is a sexual attraction to prepubescent children, okay? An attraction to pubescent kids in puberty and older, that's not pedophilia, that's homosexuality. And the majority of the perpetrators, the priests themselves, were admittedly homosexual. Right? Now, why do we blame it on pedophilia instead? Well, unfortunately, homosexuals in our culture today are like the sacred cows. You don't say anything negative against them. And you're familiar with the John Jay report on it's a big report that was written on this that blamed it on pedophilia. Well, that was written at the John Jay College in New York. So who was it written by? College professors, academics, right? If they had said that the problem was homosexuality, they'd be crucified. They'd lose their jobs, they'd lose their tenure, they'd be blackballed out of higher ed. So they were covering their own butts. They weren't going to say what it was real about. But the real problem was homosexuality. And you had a lot of priests, a lot of them went into the seminary at a time when it wasn't safe to be out of the closet in public. So you figure if you become a priest, no one's never going to ask you why you never got married. Right? A good place to hide. And that's what happened. So that's kind of the truth about it. Where you're going to go to really find out that truth and understand it, I really don't know. It's very difficult. But there are, however, a lot of priests who do struggle with pornography addiction and sexual addiction. And we have to work on that. I actually have, working with us with Integrity Restored is a priest. His name is Father Sean Kilcawley. He's actually the director of the Family Life Office for the Diocese of Lincoln. And he's going to be putting together a program for priests, and I would hope it would be for deacons too, to help understand this problem among clergy. Yes?
Yeah, I'd be a little, you suggested that we might become spiritual directors. I think there's more involved in spiritual direction than just what we have. I mean, I think we can be companions on the journey. Okay. But I wouldn't.
Well, then you're all going to have to go back to school and get more training in spiritual direction. Yeah. And it's hard, it depends, because it depends on the diocese. Like, for example, in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, to become a deacon, you actually have to get a master's degree in theology. It's a lot of training, and a lot of them do spiritual direction. They do weddings, they do funerals, they do baptisms, they do spiritual direction, basically everything a priest does except for Eucharist and confession. So it depends on the diocese. So you may have to go in and get some more training on spiritual direction.
Don't tell Jane that, for God's sake.
She's in the back, she heard it.
Another 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, John.
It's hard. Yes?
The problem that you've described with pornography is so broad and overwhelming, touching so many different aspects of life and media. It's all about us. And we see marriages that fail as a result. The children of those marriages carry the trauma and become the next generation of porn users. We're talking about caring for a small subset of those people who are willing to change. Yeah. What do we do to make the problem ultimately go away?
Education. Okay. People ask me, they say, Dr. Kloponos, do you see any hope for our culture? Because you're right, it's everywhere. and it's affecting multiple generations. Do you see any hope? I say, yes, there is hope, but it's going to take 50 years. I compare pornography use today to tobacco use 50 years ago. Now, 50 years ago, doctors knew tobacco would kill you. They knew it would give you cancer and lung disease and heart disease and all these bad things, but no one could say anything. It was politically incorrect. It was everybody's right to smoke, and we were going to smoke. We were smoking in office buildings and elevators and restaurants and airplanes, and Lucy and Ricky were smoking on TV. It was everywhere. It took 50 years of intensive education and unfortunately millions of people dying along the way before we as a culture finally got the message. And now wherever you go, it's all smoke-free. You can't smoke. You talk to young people about smoking, they say it's disgusting, they would never want to do it. All right? Now, cigarettes are never going to go away. They're always going to be here, but what we've done in changing our culture's attitude is we've dramatically decreased the demand for it. And this is why places like CVS Pharmacy have stopped selling cigarettes altogether. All right? This is what we have to do with pornography. We have to educate people, and it is going to take a long time with this. So, and my advice is, you do what you can. Don't get frustrated with it. You do what you can. You do your little piece, and let God take care of the rest. But we do have to educate people, and I'll tell you, pornography is never going to go away, just like cigarettes. But if we can dramatically decrease the demand for it, then we'll see a lot of it disappear. And that's what I do. And that's why I wrote my book, the workbook. That's why I go around giving these conferences, to the DVD. It's right now, it's number one is education, and number two, directing the people who are struggling to the proper resources. That's what we have to do. Yeah. So right now my goal is really to get the conversation started. Right? We have to get people, and I see that when I started doing this 7 years ago, nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody. Now I'm finding people are starting to want to talk about it. And I think the media has helped. How many are familiar with the Ashley Madison leaks? You ever heard about that? Okay. Who here does not know about Ashley Madison? Okay. I'm going to tell you things decent people shouldn't know. Ashley Madison is a website. It's sort of a dating website for married people who want to have an extramarital affair. That's what it is. Why did they choose Ashley Madison? Well, they wanted to pick a name that was very innocent that filtering systems wouldn't block out. That's why. So you go on there and you can find someone, their slogan is life is short, if your marriage is having trouble, don't get divorced, just have an affair. Well, several months ago, some hackers got in and they leaked the names and addresses and personal information of a lot of people who had signed up for that. It all came out. In fact, a couple people actually committed suicide because of that. Several of the names were politicians. That didn't surprise me. So that's what's happening. So it's bringing it to the forefront. How many of you are familiar with Jared Fogle, who is the spokesman for Subway? Lost all that weight. He was just convicted of child porn and pedophilia. Yeah. Okay. It's coming out. How many of you are familiar with Josh Duggar from the reality TV series, the Duggars with their 19 kids? He came out admitting he has an addiction to pornography. Right? It's finally coming out into the media, and which I think is a good thing because it's going to get to people to talking about it and realizing that, yeah, this is a problem, we have to address it. So like I said, I'm starting to see it come out and people willing to talk about it. But if we can get that conversation started, then we can get in there and really educate people. Any other questions? Okay, well, it's 25 after 1. Let's take a 10-minute break. And yes, Sakura?
Yes, Beth and Steve are going to be here at 1:45 because we are running ahead. Is that?
That's fine. If you want to take a longer break, and then we can just come right in with them?
Yeah, that's only 20
minutes.
minutes.
Here in about 15 minutes, 1:45.
Yeah. Let's take a break. Smoke them if you got them. So, we'll talk now.